Hi, this is Ed Rising, and welcome back to Ed's Pop-O-Matic podcast, a retro pop culture podcast where everything retro beats anew if you keep it in your heart. And our special guest today is an author, a journalist. Her name is Ann Moses, and you may not recognize her name so much, but you will remember who she worked for way back in the day. Her name is Ann Moses from Tiger Beat magazine. She was the editor back in the 60s and 70s. We have Ann today, and we have our panelist of Gail Bajkowski and Barb, how do I pronounce that? Solamp?
Collentine. Well, you can just forget
Collentine. I got it all wrong completely.
No. That's my maiden name, but just go to Collentine.
Barb Collentine. Very good. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
It's a pleasure to have all these ladies with me today and have a little bit of fun going back into yesteryear and talking about the teen magazine Tiger Beat that was, I don't know about everybody else that's in my audience, but for me, it was a big deal. I gotta say, it's a real kick to have you here, Ann.
Thank you.
Thank you for being such a big part of my youth and our youth.
Well,
really,
very nice
it really
of you.
was a big deal for us to have a connection to people like David Cassidy and the Osmonds and the Monkees and so forth that were our idols back in the day. And our connection to them was through Tiger Beat magazine. And so I want to thank you for that. And I'm going to start off with asking you a little bit about how you got into journalism. Was that something you wanted to do when you were in high school or junior college or something like that?
Well, it actually started in junior high, 7th and 8th grade. Our local I grew up in Anaheim, just 2 miles from Disneyland. And so our local newspaper on Fridays, they had a single page that was devoted to reports from student reporters at different schools around Anaheim, the high school, the junior high. And so I was interviewing students or talking about someone, who had excelled in sports or whatever it was. And because I was paid by the inch, 15 cents an inch, obviously I wrote really the longest stories I could. So that started it off. Then in high school, I was sports editor of the yearbook in my junior year and editor of the yearbook. And in the course of being the yearbook editor, I was chosen to go to a week-long class put on by the head of the journalism department at Oklahoma State, who was teaching at University of Southern California. So the ones of us that were chosen, we got to stay in the dorms and attend classes all week, but we also had activities. And I learned so much about yearbooks, but he was such a good professor. I really learned a lot about why you do certain things, to enhance the reader's experience. So it certainly had value for my senior yearbook, but then I found that it stayed with me when I became, co-editor of my junior college newspaper. And then from there at Tiger Beat, because so many of the things that I learned, I was able to use, and I had that concept in my head just from that 1 week, or was it 2 weeks? Anyway, it was really a neat experience.
Yeah.
So, with that experience in high school and college, and then when I went to work for Tiger Beat, that was the ultimate.
That's cool. Well, before you got to Tiger Beat, you worked for Disneyland.
I did.
And that must have been an incredible experience. And I'm a Disney buff myself.
Yes, it was such an incredible experience because I was dating a boy, um, and I was only 15 and a half. And you had to be 18 to work for Disneyland, but you only had to be 16 if you worked for one of the lessees, because the lessees at that point in time, Disney did not, while he owned everything on Main Street, everyone leased out the magic shop, the, all those, the candy shop, Carnation, all those things. Well, one of them was Sunkissed on Main Street. Uh, and they sold, orange juice and lemonade. So the boy I was going with, his father was the manager. So he kind of bent the rules, and I got to go to work at 15 and a half at Sunkissed in Adventureland, which was called Sunkissed, I presume. And we were right across the street from the Jungle Cruise. So, I mean, to be that age and making more money than I could make at babysitting, which I was absolutely terrible at. You wouldn't want me to watch your kids. I just, there was just my older brother and me. So I had zero experience, and it was not my jam. And so it was just so much fun. And literally every day when I would go to work in the summers, I usually worked 11 to 8. And I remember, because the way you walked in, we had an employee entrance, which you came out right by, well, between Tomorrowland and Main Street. So you crossed Main Street and went over to Adventureland. Well, every day because I got there 15 minutes before work, like our generation did. And every time it would be when the Disneyland band was doing the parade down Main Street with Mickey Mouse as the drum major. And I'm telling you, every time that band went by, it had, I just felt so full of, I don't know, appreciation. And it was kind of like, I can't believe I'm here. This is so neat. And to have that feeling every day and to see all the people reacting to it.
Yeah.
Then by that point, it was like 62, I believe. Yeah, 62. And so, at Disneyland, it only opened in 55.
Right.
So it was, for so many people going to Disneyland, it was the first time. And it was just, it was pure magic. So that's how I started my day. Then I get over to Adventureland, and I'm serving orange juice and lemonade and all those things. And it was just, if ever you were down, if you were bored or you were just hanging around and you didn't have a smile on your face, literally a supervisor, and they were all men at that time, and they were dressed in suits, and they would come over and say, why aren't you smiling? Because to work at Disneyland, you have to go through Disneyland University. And, so it was like, oh, well, I'll work on this, because you wanted to do things right, having such a cool job. And also in Disneyland University, you were taught that Disneyland is a first name organization, from the street sweeper and the people, and they're the guys that scrape up the gum, after the park closes. From the very lowest to the very top, meaning Walt Disney, always call them by your first name. So my supervisor's name was Dick, and he became the president of Disneyland and Disney World. And it was Dick Nunes. And he spent his whole career, heading Disneyland. But he was so nice, and we learned that even if you meet, Walt Disney, you don't call him Mr. Disney, you call him Walt or Uncle Walt. And so it's like, I had that stuck in my head.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was such a inclusive operation. you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And so it just, I mean, it struck me even back at, 15 and 16, that this was a pretty special place.
And you did get to meet
So,
Walt.
say what?
And you did get to meet Walt.
I did. One morning I was opening up, and the park opened at, I think, 8 in the summertime, and so I would get there at 7:30, 7:45, because I had to get everything up, the coffee made, because a lot of employees would come to, Sunkist to get a cup of coffee on their breaks, and just get everything set up. So I'm setting it up, and I noticed that there was a group over on the Jungle Cruise, and they were getting off a Jungle Cruise ride. Well, usually the boats hadn't started to run yet. And sure enough, it was Walt Disney, and he was with some of the supervisors. And like he did many, many times during his years, he came out to the park early because he would go on the rides, and then he would point out to them, gee, as we go around this one curve, it's kind of anticlimactic. We've got to do such and such to improve that. Little details that turned out to mean everything in every place in Disneyland.
Sure.
So they were walking, and they came up to our juice stand, and I said, "Good morning, Walt." I said, "What can I get you some orange juice?" And he said, "Yes, please," and called me Anne because I had my name tag on. And so I said, "Well, do you want small or large?" And he got a large orange juice, so I served it up. And then, as he was still just standing there and drinking his juice, I mean, I didn't quite know what to say, because that's a pretty big deal. And yeah, I just blurted out. I said, "Uncle Walt, I wrote 2 articles for the employee newsletter." And he said, "Oh, you're a writer." And I was kind of taken aback by that, because I had never considered myself a writer.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, you just keep at it, and maybe someday that'll really pay off for you. Or you never know what's going to happen." That was it. You never know where it will take you. Now I remember the exact words. You never know where it will take you. And I mean, I had no idea of that significance at the time.
Yeah.
But I honestly felt, as I say in my book, I felt like he was sprinkling fairy dust on me,
Sure,
because from that point on, I just kind of moved up in my career, and what an awesome experience.
It must have been incredible. And
It
the
was.
book that Anne mentions is that she has her memoirs called MEOW, which actually is very good. And there's stories like this, and her career with Tiger Beat that's throughout this book, very, very well detailed. And it moves very well, I gotta say. I mean, I
Thank
read
you.
this, and you go from one story to the next, and it really does flow very well, and very interesting, the background of how Tiger Beat came to be, the philosophy of its writing and so forth. So I highly recommend the book. I wanted to ask you just to comment a little bit about Disney. The man is a incredible entrepreneur, and we should all be very thankful for Walt Disney. During the years at Tiger Beat, you got a chance to work with the monkeys very closely. Am I correct?
Oh, I sure did.
Right. And Gail and Barb, jump on in. If you want to talk a little bit about monkey stuff, go for it. You want to whatever.
Well, I'm kind of curious how, Anne, how you transitioned from your Disney job to Tiger Beat, because you were there in the very early days of Tiger Beat, right? It was a new magazine.
I was. Well, the transition was pretty easy, because at Disneyland it was weekends and summers during high school. So that was perfect because I was very involved in high school activities, you know, and so there was time for everything in those days. And then when I got the job at Tiger Beat, it was, you know, I spoke Derek Taylor, who had been the publicist for the Beatles. You know, I had gotten to know him because after I wrote my first article, when I interviewed the Dave Clark Five when they came to town, and that was a very just a spontaneous event because I was also nights during the summer, I would volunteer at Melodyland, which was a theater in the Round, if you remember those, and they would have like Broadway shows that were on the road. So, I mean, I got to see shows like Camelot and Annie Get Your Gun, because after you seated the audience, we could either take a seat if there were empty seats or stand in back and watch the whole performance. And here I was getting to see, you know, Broadway singers and dancers and getting to see all those things. But this one night in the summer of '65, I went to work and I hadn't paid any attention. You know, I did have a busy schedule, but I hadn't paid any attention to who was, you know, what show was playing that night. Turns out it was the Dave Clark Five, and it was their first Southern California appearance, you know, after they'd had one or two hits. And so also on the bill were, I'm trying to think of who else was on the bill, but I know there was one couple that I'd never heard of before. They were called Sonny and Cher. They were on the bill, but I wasn't bowled over by them as much as I was the Dave Clark Five. When I watched them, it was just like, I have to interview them. And so, long story short, and the whole entire story is in the book, but basically I got to interview them because they had a second show and I got to interview them between the shows. And it was just so cool talking to these cute British, they weren't really boys, but they were, you thought of them as boys, you know, they were young men. And they were just so nice and so sweet. And they were still in their honeymoon phase of their career. So they loved talking, you know, answering questions, and it was all very relaxed. But at the same time, you know, the butterflies were going inside because I'm interviewing the Dave Clark Five. So anyway, I published that story in my college paper, and it was not well received with the college paper. My fellow journalists on the paper kind of said, well, they're just a teeny bopper group, you know, why don't you write about real artists, meaning Bob Dylan, etc. That's where their heads were at. And it was like, whatever, dudes, you know, I didn't care. I had fun. Put it in the paper. And then this young woman and her mom, they were writing a weekly music newspaper called Rhythm and News. And it was distributed all over Southern California at record stores. And they sold it for 5 cents. It was like 4 mimeographed pages. And so they said, well, would you like to come to work for us? And I said, sure. And it was for no money. It was just, you know, the chance to go out on more interviews. So that was great. So having done that, I realized it would be really nice after a few months to get paid for what I was doing and continue doing all the fun stuff. And so I had met Derek Taylor. He was representing the Beach Boys and the Byrds, and he would soon be the publicist for all of Dick Clark's Caravan of Stars, you know, like Paul Revere and the Raiders. And so I was every time, one of the things that I had done, and this was for me, I felt like these publicists that are asking me to come and do a story on their group or whatever, they might never see my finished product. So I always took them a copy. And so that day I was taking Derek Taylor a copy of something I had written about the Beach Boys.
Mhm.
And while I was at his office, I said, "Do you know the people at Tiger Beat?" And he said, "Yeah, I write a monthly column." And so I said, "Well, I'd really like to be able to introduce myself. Could you just get me a meeting with the editorial director so I can introduce myself?" And instead of saying yes, he just picked up the phone and called the editorial director. And he said, "Can you be over there in a half hour?" And he was on Sunset and this was on Highland. So I said, "Of course." So that same afternoon, I drove over and interviewed with Ralph Binner, who is the editorial director, and he was one of the three people that started the magazine. And they had just had their first issue in September of '65, and this was December of '65. And so I just thought, I was going to ask him if I could occasionally do maybe a freelance story for him, not thinking anything beyond that. And he said, "Well, you write me 2 comp stories, So, and he said, "I want you to do them in Tiger Beat style." And he said, "Then we'll take a look." And so, of course, I raced home, spent the weekend going over 2 stories that I had. I had interviewed James Brown for Rhythm and News, but it was quite an extensive interview. So I gave them a story on the DC-5 and James Brown. And even though James Brown, you wouldn't call him a teen idol, but at that point in time, Tiger Beat, they were happy to print anything they could about any of the artists because they didn't quite know where their audience was yet. So I took them back on Monday morning, or Monday after school, because I was like off at 3 or something. So the following Monday, I raced, back up to Hollywood, and I give them to Ralph, and Ralph reads them over right while I'm there, and he said, "Well, how would you like to work part-time?" Because I was in my last semester of junior college, and I said, "Well, I would like that." And little did I know, that they were going to pay me what would have been a full-time salary in any other job at the time, and to come in 20 hours a week. So I arranged with my communications professor to get credit for it. And so I went up there 3 afternoons a week, and then I didn't have classes on Tuesday and Thursday, so I'd go up all day sometimes. And and they just threw me in the deep end. It was like, go over and interview this person, go do this, go do that. It's because the other person that had formed the magazine with publisher Chuck Loffer, there was Lottie Powell, and Lottie had been their assistant at, all 3 of them had worked at Teen Magazine. And so Lottie was not that big. She was 10 years older than me. So she wasn't that crazy about going out and doing all these interviews like I was. And so they were happy to have somebody that was willing to go here, go there, do, whatever they wanted. And it just, by the time summer rolled around, you asked me about transition. Well, by the time school ended and I finished junior college, and I had been accepted to San Jose State to finish my journalism degree, and Tiger Beat started sending me, on tour with the Raiders and Dino, Dizzy, and Billy and the Standells, and I was going to, record launches and cocktail parties and on and on. And so, needless to say, I stayed at Tiger Beat and
Wow.
started working full time that June of 66. And
66.
so I did my last what are they called? Oh shoot, my mind's doing tricks on me. The all-night parties they would have, grad night parties. So high schools all over Southern California, many of them would have their grad night parties at Disneyland. So they would let them in at like 10 at night and it'd go till the next morning.
Yeah.
And because nobody, if you left, that was it. You couldn't come back in. And so I worked one or two grad night parties. And then it was like, well, I'm going to have to give up my job at Disneyland because, I'm running around Hollywood all day and night. So
Well,
it was pretty cool.
well,
And
that's where it let you, that's where things were going. You're going into an actual job, and that's where your
yes,
writing took you. So that's really very cool.
yes,
So
it was pretty awesome.
I want to ask you about the philosophy of Tiger Beat. For one thing, as a young person back in the day, and looking at what things are now in the last 20, 30 or so years, kids today are exposed to so much adult stuff, which is, it's worrisome. But for us, we saw fave raves and we saw all kinds of various contests and fun things. Who came up with those ideas to have this youth aspect of Tiger Beat?
Well, they had been with Teen Magazine, and Teen Magazine, I would compare it more to Teen Vogue than to a Teen Idol magazine or a pop star
A fashion magazine?
Yes, because it was makeup and girl stuff, and they had an entertainment section, but it would be 2 or 3 pages long for each issue. That was it. Well, Chuck decided when the Beatles were so huge in 65, the summer of 65, he put out a one-shot magazine, and I don't know how many he published, but I think he worked with all the distributors that he was familiar with because of Teen, and it got distributed and he sold out 100%. So at that point, he knew that there was something besides, the girls' makeup and, the latest little Peter Pan blouse or whatever was going on. And the timing was so perfect because, that was really the start of everything, when the Beatles, the British invasion came, then it just all started from the hippies to Monterey pop to on. And, he was established by then. But if you look at the first few issues of Tiger Beat, there's just a mixture of everything. There are stories on female singers and the dancers on Hullabaloo, and they had a whole silly cartoon section, and I don't know if they got that from like Mad Magazine or what, but it was the Beatles meet Peyton Place or something, which really made no sense to me. But I think they were, throwing pasta at the wall and just to see what would stick. Well, that was, that they had some control over how it progressed, but it was also being in the right place at the right time. The fact that our publisher Chuck had received a heads up from Screen Gems that this new group called the Monkees were going to be on TV. And so before their show ever aired, before I had been to a introductory meet and greet at Screen Gems, which was I think the Thursday before the show was to air. And Chuck had wrapped up, contracts for Tiger Beat's official Monkey Spectacular and Collins by the Monkeys. I'm trying to think of it was called Monkey Talk. So it just, he had that all lined up. So when they, and then once their show aired, everything went crazy. And we just followed suit. We filled up, we filled up the magazine with not only them, but everyone that they felt like
Uh-oh,
Frozen a
frozen.
little bit. Hopefully she comes right back.
Did we lose her?
Hope not.
She'll come back. She'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me
Probably not.
just pause this for a second.
There she.
uh-oh.
Yeah, and I'm sorry we lost you for a second, but we got you back.
Oh, okay, good. You need me to repeat something?
No, you were saying, it's interesting, like you said, the timing when you're saying this magazine launched fall of 65 and just a
Yes.
year later, the Monkeys, and boom, you guys were perfect for each other. You were promoting Screen Gems product.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you had access to all this content that all these young readers were really eager for. That,
Right.
that really, the timing was just phenomenal.
And
would
yes,
think
so we
if
were
I-
benefiting them, but of course they were selling magazines like Chuck never dreamed.
Yeah, and
And
I
it would get better.
I would think if I could just jump in for a sec. Hi, Ann. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
I've known you my whole life. You just didn't know it. I would
That's
think
wonderful.
I would think that television really was key to the success also, because once you had all these cute girls and boys every week, and this could never magazine, I don't think, could have really come out in radio. I mean, once these young cute kids like the Bradys, the Monkeys, the Partridges, whatever, and every week they were on TV, and when these magazines came out, it was like our internet almost, where we couldn't get enough of these kids.
Yes.
And I think it must have really, I don't know if Tiger Beat, no offense, I mean, I think it became huge with television. They kind
Oh,
of
that was the key ingredient.
Yeah.
That this wasn't the Beach Boys that maybe they could go see a concert, or they might see them on the Ed Sullivan Show, or the Tommy Dorsey Show, like Elvis. But they were in their homes every week.
Yeah.
So they instantly felt like not only they knew them, but that drove them to want to know everything about them. And that just became the magic combination.
Yeah,
Because-
and I would say when some of the shows went off the air and those faces weren't seen, you guys obviously would try out a new show, a new face. Oh, maybe this one will be cute. So Tiger Beat, the shows might have gone away, but Tiger Beat never did, because it was always new people for the kids to fall in love with. I mean, I would say the lifespan of most of my life of Tiger Beat was 5 years, maybe 10 years old to 15. And then those shows lasted that long, probably too. And once my faves went on, no competition here, but once my faves went off, I went away, and my little sister was watching the next bunch of shows and reading your magazine as well. So that's just an observation. And I don't want to take up too much time, but I did want to ask you a question about your book, which I read. I'm going to say I was on the internet like everybody, a lot of people I've met, Ed being you one of them, and Gail as well. When David Cassidy passed away around 2017, I really got onto Facebook. And that's when I met Ed and Gail. And that's when I saw your book about, I'm going to say about 2018 maybe. And I didn't realize, I thought, oh my God, how long has this been around? I can't believe I never knew of this book, and I ordered it immediately. And I saw it was written in 2017. It was published in 2017. And I thought for sure it was years earlier, and it was just something that had popped up because a huge teen idol like David had passed. But so I wanted to ask you, I read it in like, I'm going to say probably 3 days, one summer on my back porch while I was a teacher I had the summer off.
Perfect.
And when people ask me, oh, you read that, what's it like? I said, it's like a never ending Tiger Beat magazine. It just keeps going because that's what it reads like that with all the names and all the pictures. But my question is, again, without going on too long, why did you suddenly write this book? All of a sudden, Ann Moses, a name I've heard, but not ever out loud in my life. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I know who Ann Moses is. Like, why did Ann Moses suddenly decide to sit down and write this book?
Well, it began the day Davy Jones died, which was, okay, I don't remember the year. This is bad.
2012.
2012.
Thank you. And I was working at what would be my last job in an orthodontic office, and all my coworkers were 20-something young ladies, and I got my last job on my 65th birthday. So it was like, I was the old lady in the group. But I mentioned to my one friend there, I said, oh, somebody I was really close to died. And I don't know, I was very upset by it because I just, none of us expected that, for Davy to die so young. And so they said, well, how did you know him? And I said, oh, I used to work at this teen magazine, but they didn't really know who Davy Jones was. They didn't know who the Monkees were. I mean, they were millennials. And so I said, well, I have pictures. Do you want me to bring my pictures in and show you? And they said, oh, yes. Okay. So I had a book of prints of all the pictures you see in Tiger Beat. And, because our photographer always gave me a print of any picture with me. And those were the ones I kept, And so I pulled them out and I took them into the office, and they recognized Elvis, and they kind of recognized the Monkees, I think, because some of them had seen them either on MTV or whatever the next iteration was when they were shown again. And instead of asking me questions about Tiger Beat, because, they didn't really, they sort of had an idea of what I did, but they started Googling me. I had never Googled me at this point. I worked on the computer. I did all my accounting on the computer. I loved it. And I emailed people, but I had never been on social media. And they go, well, you have 60 pages on Google. And I go, what? And I was just bowled over. So at that point, needless to say, I Googled myself and I went, wow. And so I decided that I was going to write a blog. So I started writing a blog, and my first blog was called I Used to Be Ann Moses. And my younger son still teases me about it today. He goes, oh, hi, I used to be Ann Moses. But I started writing about, how I got to photograph the Rolling Stones in '66, after flying up to San Francisco with the Jefferson Airplane and going to the Rolling Stones concert. And I started writing a few more about my times in Hawaii with Dino, Dizzy, and Billy. And here I was writing again, and I had not written like that in the interim years at all, because in my mind, I felt like I was a writer for teens. I felt like I was just I was good enough to write for Tiger Beat. And as I would write those stories, I would think, I'm getting a nice response to these, and people are recalling these things, and I was realizing it was having an impression. Again, something I never anticipated in a million years. So after I had 5 or 6 blog posts done, and I'm always long-winded, you asked me to write something brief and to the point, forget about it. Ever since junior high, I'm going for the extra 15 cents, and but it turned out that's just the way I write. And so I thought, well, I want to write a book. And so I just thought, well, I really need help. And that was when I contacted the girl that would be my editor, Ann Wicker. And she had, they had seen her blog post about Davy dying. And she talked about, when I was 12, I wanted to be like Ann Moses. She was cool. She knew all the stars. And I'm going, she mentioned me on her blog, and so.
And you're too humble. You are too humble. You are so important.
Right. Yeah.
You're so important in so many of our lives. It's like you can't even believe it.
I know.
Shame on those millennials.
But it was just such a revelation, once I got on Facebook and saw those things and started doing some content, because it was like, well, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? And then finally I realized, not only can I take them back in words, why don't I, take pictures of stories, transcribe the stories, or tell about them, or just print, short ones. I finally learned they didn't all have to be, 1,000 words in a per Facebook post. And so I just started working on the book with Ann. She was in North Carolina and I was, in Arizona, and we would meet different places in the US. She had never seen my mind is doing it again, but Santa Fe, she had never seen Santa Fe. So our first meeting, we both flew into Albuquerque and we met at the airport and started working in Santa Fe. And then we had 3 or 4 other times that we met for a week and really worked intensively on it, besides all the emails back and forth. And it just started to come together, and it just seemed natural to tell the story in sequence of what happened at what time, because that's how my life had gone, and that's what I was trying to convey, those 6 years.
Well, I am glad that you did it, and I just love this book so much. If I ever meet you, I would want you to autograph it. I have one more question. I don't want to take up a lot of more time.
Please do, Bob.
My question is, Bobby Sherman wrote the foreword.
Yes.
Why Bobby Sherman? How did you get in touch with him, and how's he doing?
Oh, well, I really didn't know how to contact anybody, but I still had Bobby's home address, from back in the day, and he was still living in Sherman Oaks at the time. And so I wrote him a letter. And he had given it to Ward Sylvester, who, was his manager and also one of the Monkees.
He was Davy's manager, right? For a number of years, yeah.
And so he took care of it from there, and it came in my email one day, and it was like, oh my gosh, and it wouldn't be too long after that Ward would pass away. So it's like the timing was just great. But Bobby, after he left, after his fame ended, he started doing EMT work, emergency services on the freeways. And he worked up to the position of being the lead instructor for the Los Angeles Police Department for their EMT department. And he wore a police uniform and taught, many of the people that came in and worked for the police department as EMTs. So he had a really, I'd say, fulfilling life after the fame.
There's a funny story about Bobby Sherman talking about one night he had to, rescue this woman, and he's got her. I guess what she was must have been on the floor or whatever, and they're trying to transfer her into the ambulance and so forth. And the woman looks at him and says, "God, you're Bobby Sherman." And then he needed to give her oxygen.
Yeah. Mouth to mouth, yeah.
And he has aged very well. He still looks great.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things he wrote in the intro to your book, I'll paraphrase, but it was how the overall fundamental message conveyed through Tiger Beat was that these idols and celebrities really had respect for the fans. And that's pretty much that's how he stated it. And I have to say, with my experience reading the magazine, that's always been true. And that's such an important thing, I think, for kids, the age of your readership, preteens, young teens, to have that kind of, sort of reinforcement that what you're doing, it isn't silly. It's important to these kids. And I think Tiger Beat really underscored that. That definitely came through editorially.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, we were very conscientious about what we did and didn't print. We weren't a tabloid. We weren't going to say that Davy was married until Davy was ready to say he was married. And it was like, that doesn't serve his purpose at the time because he didn't want it known yet. And it didn't serve ours because we weren't gonna kill the goose that laid the golden egg. So it's like we knew certain things going on in the background. Of course, we knew that David Cassidy smoked, but we didn't print any pictures of him smoking until we did the headline article, and on the cover, David quits, and it was that he quit smoking. So that's when we first printed a picture of him with cigarettes. And of course, the article was it's smoking is so bad, and he's really happy he quit, blah blah blah. But it's like we were conscious that we were, selling to preteens, not just 16-year-old girls, and it was always, it came true again when 16 magazine published a shirtless picture of Donny Osmond, or where his whole chest was exposed. And Mrs. Osmond had a fit. They were devout Mormons, they were modest. And we respected that. We never said, "Oh, Donnie, take off your shirt." And then looking back at some of the articles in 16, they were like, well, is Donnie gonna like the way you kiss? Well, here's kissing lessons. Or I mean, it was like, it was more titillating. And we kept it pretty straight.
There were FM, you were AM.
Well, you had to ride that fine line, because again, there's a certain innocence to that age and to your readership, and you had to keep it interesting but keep it kind of innocent. But look, thinking back, things are very different now, and I really appreciate there's definitely a charm that comes through on those old issues, and it's a joy to read them, to look back.
Oh, that's so fun. And I have friends that I'll lend an issue to, And it brings back, and they're friends that were of the age that they did read Tiger Beat. In fact, my best friend, whose name is Robert Pala, and he did the final last edit on my book because I was too long-winded. He said it doesn't flow. And Barb, your comment and Ed, you said it really flowed right along. And that was because of the final edit, because I had to be checked to some degree. And it really made a difference in the fact that it does flow along. And I owe that to him. But he was reading it when he was 10 years old. And, actually, he wanted to be Ann Moses. And he got in trouble in 4th grade because of that. Because after a test, they had to take a test, and then they could do answer an extra question for extra points. And it says, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he wrote, I want to be Ann Moses. And it got him sent to the principal's office.
Wow.
And
What a
he'll
wonderful
never
tribute.
forget it to this day. And
That's awesome.
when the principal said, well, why did you write this? And he said, because Ann and I have the same birthday. And it turns out we do. We celebrate our birthdays together now every year. And he's been a journalist for 30 years. So, I mean, he wanted to be me in the sense that he thought it was cool that I hung out with stars, but that I wrote about them. And then he has dedicated his life to journalism, and he's just, he's written a couple of books. He's just outstanding. So it's like, how would I have ever have known that? And it's just, so it is just, to me, it's one of the absolute positives that has come from the whole internet, is this chance to look back at whatever it is, political history or, societal history, but to look at your teenage years when so many things were going on during those times, the Vietnam War and on. But people just resonate. And I mean, now on Fridays, I usually put the highlights of different issues so that you can see, well, the September 1969 issue, this is what was in it. And people say, I remember this issue, I still got it in my basement. And it's just that we get to travel back together. I mean, did I ever think I would be able to recall and write about those days? Of course not. It's like, who would care? And now I come to find out there is an audience that just, likes to travel back in time with me. So
I gotta tell you, Anne, you've got an incredible way of recalling detail to detail. I'm reading the book and I'm saying, how does she remember what she had for pot roast or what, things like that? And I just found it to be hysterical, some of the details. But when you're a writer, I suppose you have to have that kind of a mind, and
well, I did remember so many things, and to this day, I mean, I tell you, when a song comes on, I just can't listen to just the song.
where
It's like,
you're at.
oh no, that's Daydream Believer. I clapped on that song, and I can hear myself clapping.
That's
I
incredible.
mean, this happened, I'll be shopping for vegetables, and the Bee Gees come on. It's just it's just unexpected joy.
True.
But I did have to refer back to a lot of Tiger Beat issues for specific details, because I would remember things, the big picture, but then, what did this, this and this happened on my, when I went on tour with Paul Revere and the Raiders. So the things that I didn't remember off the top of my head, they were right down there in print, so it was like, that was a big help.
That's pretty great. Let me ask you, and two things. First of all, regards to Tiger Beat in general, the reaction that you've received from so-called cool rock stars like Jefferson Airplane or Rolling Stone or whatever. Did you ever feel that they treated you as an equal journalist, as like they would to Cream or maybe Rolling Stone or some of them other more hip magazines? Or did they look down on Tiger Beat for being more preteen oriented?
Well, in the early years, we were when we would publicize a group, even if if it was Led Zeppelin or if it was whoever, they appreciated it when they were in their infancy. They wanted that attention. They knew they were playing awesome music, and they wanted that. And whenever I interviewed, and many of them, I also was a weekly correspondent to the music newspaper in the UK, the New Musical Express. So I had a column called Hollywood Calling, and it was about, oh, well, this is what happened in Hollywood this week. But when groups were coming over, they would call me and say, well, can we get together while we're there? Because they knew the people at home were going to hear about it because I'd write about it in my column. So there's certainly, and the fact that it was going to go in Tiger Beat too, they didn't care that much, but many of the groups like that. I mean, the time that Led Zeppelin, came to town, and Jimmy Page said, would you introduce me to the Monkees? And I took him out to the Monkees.
Isn't that great?
And it was fabulous. Or the time the DC-5 wanted to go to Disneyland. It was during the period when no long hairs were allowed, because at some point they cut that off.
Yeah.
And I called my boss and I said, okay, these guys have long hair, but it's really short long hair. And they're really nice guys. They're not going to be rowdy. They're not going to cause any problems. And so I took them to Disneyland. And I mean, they had the time of their lives.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so you think about some of these things, or the Who when they were starting out. And I really didn't know what to do with them. I got to know them better as time went on, but they had just come to Hollywood. Again, Derek Taylor was representing them. And I said, well, what if we just do a photo shoot outside at Griffith Park? And so we did, and they were swinging on the swings and sliding on the slides and walking through Griffith Park. And so we called it, Kids for a Day. And, would they later think, well, why did we do something like that? We're a serious, rock group.
Serious artists.
And they they didn't think twice about it. They had fun. I mean, the pictures of oh, here I go again. Keith Moon eating my hair, I mean, that's a classic.
Oh, that's
so
great.
It's like, it was really cool.
When you were writing up the various columns, again, you would interview these artists or these TV stars and so forth, and you would do a life story series. You do a 3-part or 4-part episode on David Cassidy, this is my life, or Donny Osmond, this is my life, etc.
Yes.
How much of that would you say would actually be from their mouth to your mouth? Or how much might a lot of that was more or less fabricated for the Tiger Beat audience?
I would say about 90% was their voice, because I would record those interviews, like Lucille Ball's interview about Desi's life story. That's
a great story.
I used everything that she told me, and it was all straight from her mouth, because at some point I didn't have to transcribe my tapes. There was an assistant that would transcribe the tapes, but I would tell them it has to be word for word, because that was so important to me. And so David's life story, I mean, these were not a 1-hour interview. These were many hours over, many days to compile a 6-part The life of David Cassidy, or Bobby Sherman. You know, we did Bobby's life story, and then we did his life story by his sister, and I think we did a life story by his mom, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like we
From
covered all the
angles.
bases. I mean, I don't think he has any new stories to tell. That's
That's
for
great.
sure.
Let
So
me ask you a question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
we took those really seriously. I mean,
did
I
that?
did. Let's
That's
put
cool.
it that way. It was really important to me.
Let me
Same thing
ask-
with the Tiger Beat interview, because you know, I had seen the Beatles interview no, I had seen Paul, here I go again.
Paul McCartney.
No, who's married to Joanne Woodward?
Oh,
Newman?
Paul Newman.
Thank you. Thank you. See, I get there's so many names.
Too many names.
So I had seen the Paul Newman interview in Playboy, and I saw the way it was serious. And I said, well, we need that in Tiger. We need an interview where they're giving me serious answers, you know, not joking around, not telling stories. And that was what the Tiger Beat interview became. And of course, that was word for word. It was the Tiger Beat question and their answer verbatim. And I always liked that being a part of it, because you know, I figured, yeah, you know, you've got to have the, you know, the turn on and turn off story, and the 25 ways, you know, David Cassidy will fall in love with you, or whatever it was. But I felt like there should also be, because a lot of these people were surprisingly, many of them were intelligent, many of them, I mean, Peter Tork is the perfect example. He really had a fine mind, and so he was so thoughtful in his answers, and he was so conscientious about the information he was putting out. It was important to him, and so that was what I was trying to achieve in the serious parts of
Yeah.
the interview. You know, we
Sure.
still had a lot of fun stuff and
Sure.
fun features that you know were not, you know, word
Wow.
for word, but
Yeah. It's
Well,
funny
you know,
to
when
think
you-
about.
I hate to interrupt Ed, but I have to, unfortunately, I have to go.
All right, Gail.
Oh,
Good seeing you.
So
Okay.
I will,
Dean Barb.
well,
I will
thanks, Barb.
thank you so much, Anne. It's a thrill.
Thank you,
I follow
Barb.
you on Facebook, and hopefully you'll recognize my name now. Gail, always a pleasure, and can't thank you enough for the magazines, the book, and your life. Just great.
And
So thank you.
DM me, and we'll figure out a way to autograph your book. Okay.
Oh, thanks. That'd be
Oh,
great.
yes. Oh, yes.
Thanks. Oh, I wasn't hinting at that, but that sounds good.
Oh, well,
Thank
I
you
thought
so
of it
much.
immediately.
Thank you so
I'll
much.
take care of
Ed, Ed, thanks again for doing this. You're great at it, and I look forward to the next time.
Right on.
So
Barb.
nice to
Bye,
meet you.
Barb.
Take care.
Good to
right?
see you.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thanks again.
Take care.
Yeah, it's funny to think about telling the life stories of some of these guys, because many of them were all of 20 years old at the time.
Oh,
They
yes.
were very young. And that in some cases, fame and fortune was thrust upon them very quickly, and they had very little time to adjust. And, you know, here they're being hit up with all this now, and, you know, talk about this and talk about that and pose for photos, and a lot to contend with at a very young age. And
Mhm.
I have read that I think David Cassidy in particular was a little reluctant to be a teen idol at the very beginning. Do you recall anything about that?
It's not that he was reluctant to be a teen idol at the beginning. You know, when the Partridge Family was starting, that was his big jump from doing a Marcus Welby episode or a Bonanza episode. And all of a sudden he was on TV every week and he was a big star. It was a little ways into it when they had so controlled his life and how he would live his life that it's like the teenage magazine thing just got lumped in with everybody else who was controlling his life. And it was like, this is not what I signed up for. You know, he was saying, I want to be a serious musician. I want to be a serious actor. And, he felt like he had been stymied by his teen idol reputation. The same thing with Donny Osmond. Once his teen idol phase was over, he was very bitter about Tiger Beat. We had a wonderful relationship during the Tiger Beat years, but when it was over and he was trying to transition, and everybody thought of him as Donnie, one bad apple, and he wanted to do more serious things. But over time now, he has realized that the people that are filling up Harrah's every night in Las Vegas to see him are bringing Tiger Beats for him to sign. So he finally realized that we were somewhat of a scapegoat, that he felt like his career had been ruined being a teen idol. But what he realized is, after a time, it all fit into place. And I don't think he feels that way now.
I think you find that with a lot of these people, even the Beatles would be that way about having so much fame thrust upon them and so forth, that there's a great deal of bitterness and part of particularly George and John Lennon in particular. About, how they didn't have any control of their lives and so forth. And Donnie's transitioning, he really did finally come through with some really great stuff as he was a little bit older, and he continues to make great records. My opinion, really good pop stuff. I have a couple more questions, and then we sort of got to wrap up. So, I want to just ask you a little bit about Elvis.
Oh, I love talking about Elvis.
One of my favorite sections of your book is, and first of all, once again, book is called MEOW, and
it's MEOW, My Groovy Life with Tiger Beats Teen Idols.
There you go. You got the
It's a long moniker.
It's long-winded, just like Ann Moses. With Elvis, you had the first of all, being an Elvis fan as a young girl, that's pretty great. You had the opportunity to see Elvis perform his 1968 comeback special. That must have been incredible to see that.
It was just amazing. There I am. Little did I know when I was asked, when I was chosen to be one of the ones to sit on the stage while he was performing on that little tiny stage, that I would end up in the finished cut. And it was such an amazing night because have you seen the documentary on the making of the 68 special?
Yeah, I think I've seen everything on that. Yeah.
Okay, because that had revelations that I didn't know about. The way that Steve Bender got around the Colonel's silly demands and all that. That was fascinating. But at the time, we didn't realize that was going on. And, I was no longer an Elvis fan by the time the 68, once the British invasion happened, it's like I could care less about Elvis, who was making, in my mind, silly movies,
right?
Bad songs. And he was kind of square, wearing his Sansa pants and he just wasn't cool, like, when all the hippie days were starting and all that. Well, that turned on its head at the 68 special, because when he came out looking like $1 million in that black leather suit, and then to be literally 5 feet away from him while he's singing those songs. And I mean, I'd never heard his voice live before. And it was just overpowering. I mean, it was the best thing I had ever seen to date. I mean, I don't care who it was, the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl, whatever. That was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then to see myself end up in the final cut, not only sitting on the stage and clapping in a couple of shots, but then being superimposed while they're playing my all-time favorite song of his, that was so incredible.
And that's Can't Help Falling in Love.
Yes,
Yeah. Beautiful.
that's the one. And it was so
Yeah.
great. But when that documentary came out, little did I know that there would be new shots of me in it that weren't in the first one, because they showed
Wow.
different scenes that were never aired before. And there's a bunch more of me in it. And to watch yourself, in fact, one, I'm clapping, so it's not just a still shot. And it's like looking at yourself when you're, okay, 68, I was 20 years old, 21, and what I looked like and how I was acting. I mean, that's just, I mean, you know, my parents
Another
never
person
shot
though, right?
home movies. So that was like, you know, the only thing I ever had, that. And when I appeared on Happening 68, you know, there's also my introduction on that. And it's like, it was really fun to see. So yeah, it was such a fortunate
I'm so glad that you had that chance, because to see Elvis perform must have been absolutely incredible.
Oh, it was. And
You
of
know,
course,
and you
then
know,
the next year was his live opening in Vegas, and I
Right.
was invited by the International to be there and had seats up front. And whoa, you know, it just got better.
yeah, well, that's incredible.
Incredible. Yeah.
I want to just close with one more question, if you don't mind, about the book regarding the Partridge Family.
Mhm.
In the Tiger Beat magazine, you had the various contests and so forth, which are always fun to do, and God forbid, I even sent away for the love beads and the love stickers and other stuff all over, you know,
Right.
cracking me the hell up, you know, now that I think about it. But I did it. But you have a contest in there called writing an essay, 25 words or less, I guess, about a particular TV show or pop star or whatever. And I don't know if you realize this, but the Partridge Family actually had a TV episode that was actually titled 25 Words or Less, where a contest winner gets to spend a day or two with the Partridge Family. Exactly what Tiger Beat did. And they didn't give Tiger Beat credit. They,
Yeah.
I didn't. I
Win a
did
kiss
not
from
know that.
David or something. Yeah.
they didn't even
Well,
say what the magazine was. At least I'm on the syndicated version of the series anyway.
Mhm. I didn't know that. We did have a contest. It was called the Kiss David and have a part on the Partridge Family show. And that was my idea,
Yeah.
because I thought, what would be better? You know, we'd had several winners of contests. And when they came to town, I devoted the week to taking them to Disneyland, taking them to Knott's Berry Farm, Universal Studios, you know, lunch with the Bradys, dinner with the Osmonds, you know, whoever they came out to see, of course, they would spend the most time. But it's like, I got such joy out of doing that, you know, I wouldn't let anybody else do it.
Wow,
You know, it wasn't like
being that person.
yeah. And so the girl that won that contest, we had her out, and she not only got to meet David and everybody else in town, like other contest winners, which was awesome, but she got a one-line speaking part in the Partridge Family. And I mean, my original idea was, what could be greater than these other contest winners who have their photographs with all the stars in the magazine, keepsake. And we always sent the winners all the photographs we took blown up in an album. So the glossy photographs, not just what they would have in Tiger Beat for their, you know, their
For their collection.
yes.
That's cool.
And I thought, what could be greater than to be on the Partridge Family and sit at home with your family and your friends and watch it, you know, couldn't record them in those days,
No.
but to be there, and I just thought that was the ultimate. So she ended up being in the episode about Danny. They have to give away all the hamsters that he's bred, and so they, with every album, they give a free hamster. So it's like she's going up to the table and they're giving her an album, and then she gets the box, and I forget what her line was, but she got to have, and of course she had hair and makeup done by the studio makeup artist. So we photographed all that. So she got the whole treatment. And I just thought, what could have been more exciting for you know, a teenage girl?
That's
And
fabulous.
actually, with the Partridge Family show, when they did it based on that essay thing, that essay contest, they had it for comedic purposes. They had a 36 or maybe she was 50-year-old woman as the contest winner.
I'm gonna have to look for that one. I really am.
Yeah. Anyway, we have to. We're going to be closing up very shortly here, and I don't want to run out of time. And I want to thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully we could do this again sometime.
I would love to.
I'd like to ask you, just hold on for just a second after we close up here.
Okay.
And I want to ask my audience to check out Ann Moses' book. It's called MEOW, My Groovy Life with Tiger Beat Magazine. Is that the whole title? My Groovy Life with Tiger Beat's Teen Idols.
Yes.
Very cool.
And
very fun.
Ed, it's available at Amazon.com. And also on my website, autographed copies are available, and that's annmoses.com.
And you can also find Ann on Facebook. So check out her website, check out the blogs,
Instagram.
And Instagram and everything else. So, and I want to thank Gail. Gail, where can everybody find you if they want to look for you?
I'm on most social media, usually my Gail Bajkowski, and anything related to 60s and 70s pop culture. I'm probably on one of those pages. So look for me there. Or you can follow Ann Moses as well. So you can probably find my comments there.
Well, thank you very much, Gail,
so I want to
for
thank
being
Ann.
with us today.
Such a pleasure.
I want to thank Ann and Gail and Barb for being on our show today. And this is Ed's Pop-O-Matic Podcast, a retro pop culture podcast where everything retro beats the new. Please check us out on YouTube. Check us out on Facebook. Just look for Ed Rising on Facebook, and you should find some of these videos, but you can also find them on YouTube and Spotify and some other platforms. So we want to thank you very much for joining us today. Have a happy day, I guess. And keep on reading those teen magazines.
That sounds good. Thank you, Ed.